Morning. We're really continuing a series out of the book of Romans that we started last week. And so if you have your Bible, I'd invite you to open to the book of Romans. We're going to be in Romans chapter 3 today. And we're going to find that as the Apostle Paul transitions from this whole we're all guilty thing, that the good news becomes really great news. Before we get there, though, I have to tell you a little bit of a story. You all like a story, right? So here's the story I got for you. When I was in high school, there was this girl that I really liked. And I don't know about you. I don't know if you've ever been in this situation. Maybe for you it was a boy and you really liked him. I don't know what it was. But probably if you were in this situation, you understand this person was smart and funny and beautiful. Beyond compare. There's nobody even close, right? And it was all I could do to keep a straight face around this person. I could hardly talk most of the time, much less breathe. And I wanted to spend every waking moment near this person. You understand what I'm talking about? Have you ever been there? Some of you have, okay. She had a best friend, and the two of them had a summer job that they worked together, and they would go to the friend's dad's farm and pick rock out of his bean field, right? And if you've ever picked rock out of a bean field, then you know it is exactly the way it sounds. You walk back and forth across a field of beans, and you pick up rocks. And you put them in a wagon that's being pulled behind maybe a tractor or a truck, or in this case, a four-wheeler that is driving alongside you. And so you're picking up rocks and you're setting them in the wagon, and the idea is you got to clear the field of all the rocks so that the tractors can go through and the plows can get through and all that kind of stuff, so that the beans look good and grow nice and tall and have lots of beans. Well, this particular summer, it had been rather wet, and so the planting and the rock picking had been pushed back a couple of weeks. And so it was really kind of getting to the point where we had to do it. And they invited me to go along. So we got together, and at last it was dry enough to pick rocks. And these two girls, they said I could come. So we all get off, and we go down to this field, and we start going back and forth across the field. Down the field we went, we picked up rocks. At the end of the field, we turned around, and we came back up the field. And we picked up some more rocks. Down and back we went, picking up rocks as we went. It was a little bit muddy. I mean, it had been wet that spring, but it really wasn't all that bad. I mean, what do you expect? It is a field, right? So it's going to be kind of muddy. That's the way it is. That is until about the third or the fourth trip down. That's when things started getting a little bit sticky. You ever been into mud that's sticky? Starts sticking to you, starts sticking to your shoes get heavier. Pretty soon your shoes are kind of slipping and you're having to be a little bit mindful about how you're pulling them out because they might not come. You know, you just got that question in your brain, is it going to come with me? As we reached the far end of the field that particular time, we turned around and we were laughing, but not laughing. You understand what that is, right? You're laughing, but it's really not that funny because it's a serious thing, and we were thinking about how bad it would be if the four-wheeler or one of us got stuck in that field. And of course, within short order, it was decided that the four-wheeler needed some extra speed if it was going to get through the mud. So off it went, and the other two of us would pick up rocks as we went through the muddiest part, and we'd catch up with the four-wheeler in a little bit. So off the four-wheeler goes. And it's pulling its wagon, and it's going, and you hear it revving, and it goes down into the mud, and it keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going for about 50 yards, and then it stopped. And of course it stopped right in the middle of the mud, right in the worst, thickest, stickiest part of the mud, and there it was stuck. And we knew it wasn't good when the four-wheeler got stuck. But now our friend was stuck in the middle of the field with the four-wheeler, and so we waited out there to cheer her on. We told her, why don't you try going really slow? So she just barely touched the throttle, and it goes, no joy. It kind of spun its tires a little bit and didn't go anywhere. So we said, why don't you go really fast? So she did, and it dug its way down. You know how that is? When something is digging in mud and the mud's flying everywhere, and here we're all now covered with mud, and the four-wheeler is nowhere further than we had been before. It's just a little bit deeper in the mud. So we thought, maybe if we rock it back and forth. You know how you do that on the ice? You rock it and rock it. And yeah, we thought maybe that would work, but no, that didn't work either. And so we decided that, okay, we'll push. I'll just give you a hint. Pushing a four-wheeler that's stuck in the mud, that's about the messiest proposition you can come up with. Oh my, were we covered in mud. It was a mess. So here we are, all three of us out here, and guess what all of that resulted in? Nothing. In fact, if anything, each attempt resulted in the four-wheeler digging itself a little bit deeper. So there's mud on us, and the four-wheeler, which was supposed to make life so much easier, is now stuck up to its axles in mud. It wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. We knew we were in trouble. We knew that we needed help because the four-wheeler was stuck and there was nothing we could do to get it out. Last week, we started a new series about life transformation. It's from the book of Romans. We discovered the first chapter that our lives need to be transformed because we're all guilty. We've all sinned, right? What did we do to make ourselves guilty? Well, we made ourselves guilty because we traded God, the Creator, for gods made in the image of the created. Paul uses the example. He says they worship things like that are made in the images of mortal men and birds and four-footed animals and reptiles. Now for us, we might not do that. I don't know anybody who has little idols that they carved out of a stone and set them on the shelf, but the truth is sometimes we worship things like money and sex and drugs, don't we? But the truth is these little g gods, they don't even have to be things that everybody recognizes as bad. In fact, sometimes our culture applauds some of us here today because we make our job the most important thing, or we make our family the most important thing. Our gods have become things that everybody says are good, and so they say, good job, when we make them the most important. But the truth is, anytime we make something more important to us than God, it becomes an idol, which can never hope to compare to the real God who created all that is, right? And the thing is, once we've knocked God off His throne, once we've set something else up there in His place, it's easy to settle on other things as well. And so the truth is we traded God's ideal for something that was just good enough. Now again, Paul provides an example. In Romans chapter 1, he talks about how people traded the ideal of creation in which one man and one woman came together forever for sexual impurity, same-sex relationships, and lust. If you need a clear New Testament place where it says that gay lifestyle is bad, this is it. But that's not the point. The point here is that they traded in the ideal of what God designed to be perfect for something that wasn't quite there. They compromised. It's like they said, no, it's not perfect, but it's good enough. And it's also like they decided that they were in charge to decide what's good enough. You understand? I mean, who is it that gets to decide if it's good enough? Well, it's good enough for me. I get to decide. I'm the standard. I'm the one in control. And once I'm the one in control, well, it's not long before we start to do the same thing in other areas. So we traded our conscience, our hardwired sense of what's right and wrong, for whatever it was that we wanted to do. Now, Paul gives us a whole list of things that are examples of this. But the bottom line is, we all got nailed by that thing, didn't we? Every one of us found ourselves in there somewhere, and we're all convicted by something on that list. And because we're all convicted by something on that list, we realize that sin is a downward spiral, that we found ourselves at the bottom of the hole. Like a four-wheeler in the muddy field, every time we sinned, we sank a little bit deeper. Every time we compromised, we sank a little bit deeper. Every time we replaced God with something else, we sank a little bit deeper. And the more we try to claw our way out, the harder we try to get ourselves unstuck, the more we sink in, a little deeper and a little deeper still, until we find ourselves in a deep, deep hole with no way to get out. The opening words of Romans chapter 3, verse 21 then present a welcome change. Like I said, Romans chapter 3 is where we are. We're going to look today, starting in verse 21, and we're going to find here a big change. Here's what Paul says. He says, "But now, apart from the law, God's righteousness has been revealed, attested by the law and the prophets, that is, God's righteousness through faith in Jesus Christ, to all who believe, since there is no distinction. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." Paul has just spent 2 chapters convincing us that we're all sinners. We've all fallen short of God's glory. In fact, if we didn't get it the first time, he reminded us in verse 23 there, didn't he? For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. It's one of the more familiar passages in the English Bible, I suspect. But the truth is, we were supposed to be God's crowning achievement. We were supposed to reflect His glory more completely than any other creature on earth. And yet because of sin, all of that was broken. Because of sin, we don't do as good a job as we're supposed to. Because of sin, we all fall short. What's interesting, though, is that when Paul says that we fall short, he's using the present tense. In the Greek language, the present tense means that it's an ongoing thing. It keeps happening and keeps happening and keeps happening, meaning that we're still not good enough. This isn't just a past thing. It's still we're not good enough. We don't deserve to be in God's presence because He's holy. And the ancients knew, maybe even better than we do, that if we were in the presence of the holy God, His glory would wipe us off the map. But the focus of these 3 verses is not on verse 23. Instead, it's on a remarkable change. And it starts with the 2 words at the beginning of the passage, "but now." See, these are 2 huge words for us. They tell us that all of this before was happening, yes, but now something different is coming. What's about to happen next is way different than anything that came before. And this is the way things have been, but now it's gonna be better. We were stuck in sin, but now God's righteousness has been revealed. Here we have the solution to the sticky mess we've gotten ourselves into, the sin that's in our lives. And what is it? We need God's righteousness. We need God's righteousness because we don't have any righteousness of our own, right? We have to have God give us some of His. But what is righteousness? Well, to answer that, I went to the dictionary, and the dictionary defines this word righteousness as the state of one who is as one ought to be. They're just generally right. You get that? And indeed, when we think of God, we think of God is perfect in His integrity. He's as He's supposed to be in sense of virtue. He's as He's supposed to be in purity of life. He's perfect in all ways, right? He is, to use another word, holy. God is holy. Apart from the law, we can't earn that. We can never get there for ourselves. We can't do it. But yet here we have this idea that God's righteousness is shown to us and it's made available to us somehow. And Paul says that this isn't just a new solution. He says that it's attested by the law and the prophets. That means the Old Testament, because that's how they grouped the Old Testament books into the law, the first several books, and then the prophets, everything else. So this is basically saying all of the Old Testament foreshadowed this solution that is now revealed to us. And he says, what is the solution? He says, God's righteousness is made available through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. If we believe, we can tap into His righteousness. And that, my friends, is the essence of the good news. We need God's righteousness. And through faith in Jesus Christ, we can have God's righteousness. But that begs the question, well, how does this righteousness work? I mean, I'm guilty. How do I suddenly become righteous? I'm guilty. There's no way you can go from guilt to righteous. It just doesn't work. So we keep going in the passage. Paul explains, starting in verse 24. He says, they are justified freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, God presented him as a propitiation. It means a substitute, basically. He went in our place through faith in his blood to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his restraint, God passed over the sins previously committed. He was patient with us. He let us go until the solution was made apparent. It says God presented him, that's Jesus, to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time so that he would be righteous and declare righteous the one who has faith in Jesus. I want you to focus on the opening 3 words of this 3 verses. Paul says, they are justified. And that's a huge thing, because remember, like I told the kids a minute ago, to be justified means you were guilty, but God says, I'm going to take it off your record. I'm going to call you innocent instead. The word justified is a legal term. It means that the person is declared not guilty. They're restored to a right standing. And so when Paul says that these people are not, they're justified, what he's really doing is he's saying that God takes away the guilt and God rebuilds the relationship so that we can have that right standing with him once again. And here's the thing, the language here indicates that this kind of justification is available to you and me, to each of us. We can be justified. That's pretty good news. We can be justified. He can take away our guilt. He can wipe out our record. He can give us a clean slate so we can start again. And I don't know about you, but that's pretty good news to me. Am I right? Can I get an amen on that? Amen. Yeah. We can be justified, but how does it work? We can be justified, Paul says, freely by his grace. You understand why this is a big deal? Because we were guilty. We couldn't do it ourselves. We can't just declare ourselves innocent when we're the ones that are guilty. That'd be like being able to say, hey, I just punched you in the face, but it's all good. You liked it, right? I don't know anybody that likes getting punched in the face, and it doesn't work very well when I just declare unilaterally that I must be okay for it. No, we can't do it ourselves. So what he's saying here is that God does it for us. And he's also saying that it's a part of this grace thing. And we see this word grace all through the Scriptures. And it's important because, well, sometimes we miss the idea of grace. Grace is defined as unmerited favor. It's good things that we can't earn or can't buy for ourselves. If you think about it then, grace is not what's fair. If I got what was fair, I'd be thrown in eternal prison, don't you think? I'm a sinner. I deserve hell. I deserve death. I deserve it right now. If I got what was fair, that's what would happen to me. I don't like that idea. I don't want that. I want it for everybody else, but not for me. Grace is not what's fair, and that's a good thing. It's not even not getting what we deserve, right? So maybe we could go with, okay, well, just don't throw me in eternal hell, God. That's okay. Just don't give me what I deserve. And that'd be okay, don't you think? Except if that's the case, then what happens to me when I die? I end up in some sort of purgatory forever and ever and ever? I don't know about you, but I don't like eternal purgatory all that much either. Am I right? Or how about this? I just continue to linger and not ever... I don't know. We would call that mercy, not getting what we deserve. But that's not what we want either. It's not what we need. Grace is getting the good things that we don't deserve. It's when God comes to us and He says, hey, you know what? I want to spend eternity with you in heaven, in my paradise. Come live with me forever. That's pretty good. Grace is when God comes to us and says, hey, I know that you don't deserve it, but I want to fill you with abundant life here and now before you even get to eternity. That's pretty good. Grace is when God comes to us and He says, hey, I want to be your friend. Yeah, I know you're guilty, and I know you messed up, and I know it's like you punched me in the stomach, but I still want to be your friend. Will you have a personal relationship with me. That's grace, guys. And that's the way that we get justified, freely by His grace. He has to give it to us because we can never get it for ourselves. And He has to give us these good things, all of which are part of this grace. But grace isn't exactly free. It's free to me, but it's not free at all. Paul hints at this too. He says this free grace is available through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. The thing is, God couldn't just overlook our sin. Both the Jewish and the Greek legal systems demanded justice. You can't just let a guilty person go free without some sort of penalty. God's holiness and justice demanded it too. He can't just let sin go unchecked. So God sent Jesus to redeem us. That word's important too. This redemption concept, redeeming. It came from the secular slave market of the day. And basically it was the idea that someone came to pay the price for that slave to be free, right? I mean, all you had to do most often in those days, if you were a slave, it was probably because you had a debt somewhere. You owed somebody money, and so they took you off and they sold you into slavery to pay the price. So there's this debt against you, and all you have to do to not be a slave anymore is pay the price. That's it. It sounds simple, doesn't it? It sounds easy enough until you realize that, oh wait, slaves don't get paid. Slaves don't have money or property or anything else that they can use to pay for it. And so all of a sudden you see the problem with slavery. You're stuck and you can never get out. It sounds an awful lot like a four-wheeler in the middle of the field. It sounds an awful lot like sin, doesn't it? Paul used this concept that was so close. And he brought it in. And his people understood. If you're going to be redeemed, you need someone's help. Someone who's not stuck. Someone who's not a slave. Someone who's not in sin. You need somebody else, and that somebody is Jesus. That's who He is. He's the someone who isn't enslaved to sin. So you see what happened. We owed an unpayable debt. We get this. Sin equals debt. When someone does some wrong to me, what do we say? We say, I'm going to pay them back for it. It's like they owe us some debt. And we had this unpayable debt to God. But Jesus came and paid it with His life, with His blood. And because He paid the price, if we will just put our faith in Him, then our sin, our guilt will be taken away. Gone. For some of us, that's the best news we've ever heard. For some of us, this idea that we can have this fresh start, that's pretty awesome stuff. For some of us, this concept that our past can be wiped clean, that's amazing. And it's true, your guilt can be taken away. If you place your faith in Jesus, if you trust in His sacrifice, that He paid the penalty for your sin, then you will be justified. But here's something else. As if that wasn't good enough news, Paul wants to push it a little bit over the top. He wants to make it even more than that. And so in the next couple of verses, he gets to that point. Romans 3, verses 27 through 30, he basically says, hey, none of us can save ourselves and we all need Jesus, so we don't get to brag, right? That's good news. I like that. I really don't like smug people. They're all uppity and I'm holier than thou. I really don't like that. And so it's always kind of fun when somebody comes along and bops them on the head, don't you think? That's what Paul just did. He goes around to the people that are holier than thou and saying, I'm good and you're not. And he smacks them upside the head and he says, shut up. You don't get to brag. You need Jesus just as much as anybody else. Just be quiet. That's good stuff. I like that. Anytime I see something in the Scripture that I can laugh at, I love that. Don't you? He keeps going. He says, if we're justified by faith, does that mean we're off the hook for everything all the time? Does that mean that once for all we're not guilty? We can just do whatever we darn well please? We can do whatever we want now? Is that what it means? I got to be honest with you. I kind of want the answer to be yes. Anybody else willing to be honest with me? You kind of want the answer to be yes. Yes, I can do whatever I darn well please. I wish that was the answer. Okay, yes, I'll admit it. I'm guilty of that. But truth is, I'm not sure how that constitutes good news. It'd be like getting your four-wheeler stuck in the mud and having to leave it there forever. That's not great news. I kind of want my four-wheeler back, don't you? Lucky for us. In verse 31, Paul asks this very question. Here's what he says. Do we then cancel the law through faith? You have to understand, the law was God's definition of what's right and wrong. And he's basically saying, hey, if we're justified by faith, does that mean that we don't have to worry about what God decides is right and wrong? Can we do whatever we darn well please? That's the question that he's asking. Are we off the hook? Do we really get to do whatever we want? Because suddenly, that option's not looking so great. I want my four-wheeler back, right? Well, fortunately for us, the apostle also answered this. It's a rhetorical question, and so he provides the answer just to make sure that we're all on the same page. He says, absolutely not. And if you look at the original Greek, it is in very strong language. He says, no way! That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Of course that's not what we're going to do. What are we going to do instead? He says, on the contrary, we uphold the law. I want you to focus on that last phrase. We uphold the law. Because that word uphold especially, that right there is probably the biggest, strongest foundation of the good news that we can have. Because in this word, we see that we're justified through faith in His blood, and yet it's even bigger than that. Let me explain what I mean by that. In the Greek, that word, uphold, is istonomen. Right? Everybody can say that once or twice. Ready? Istonomen. You got it? That's what the Greek word is for uphold. And it means to stand, to stop, to put, to place, to establish, or to make stand. Basically, it's to make as solid as you possibly can, right? That's what it is. And he's saying we make the law solid. By embracing this justification that comes through faith in Jesus, we can uphold the law. That's what Paul is saying. We can do it. We can make the law solid. And that's a big deal because, as I said, the law outlines what God thinks is right. And if you think about that, then when we say, yes, we uphold the law, what we're really doing is we're saying, I'm going to come back to His ideal. What He says is good, what He says is wrong, I'm going to agree with Him. We're going to live the way we're supposed to live. We're going to be the way we're supposed to be. And more than that, it's us saying, you know what, God, you have the authority to make the law. You have the right to set that rule, to decide what's right and wrong, and I will listen and obey. It's us putting God back in charge. And you remember the spiral of sin? We put God out of charge. We trade in His ideal for something less. And then we start doing whatever we darn well please. Didn't we just counteract all three of those things by saying we're going to follow the law? When we're justified, we uphold the law. We make it solid. We make it firm. In the sense that we affirm that it was right. Remember what David said in Psalm 51? When Nathan put his finger in David's chest, David said, God, you're right. It's appropriate for you to judge me because I was guilty. I messed up. You are right, God. That's us. When we uphold the law, it's us saying, yes, the law is right. We were guilty and there was no way we could fix it for ourselves. It's also us upholding the law in the sense that we fulfill its requirements. Not me, not us together even, but Jesus paid the penalty for our sin. You understand that? He went and He took what the law required me to pay, and He took it upon Himself, and He took care of the debt. He satisfied God's just wrath. And you remember we talked about that last week. God's wrath by His death on the cross. Justice has been satisfied, and we're justified. But istanomon is more than these two senses, because it's in the present tense. You remember the present tense? We talked about it just a minute ago. Fall short, it's ongoing, right? Continuously. We're still not there. We're still not there. We're still falling short. But now we have it countered by this idea of istanomon, which is also in the present tense and also means it's an ongoing action. And so we begin to see that this isn't about just what happened in the past, the sin that we had back then. It's about what's happening right now. We're not just justified of our past sin. We're enabled to uphold the law that is not to sin. Right? That's what that means. Right now. Think about that for a second. We don't have to worry about the I fell short thing, I fell short thing, I fell short thing anymore. But we can start saying no to sin right now. Did you hear me, church? We don't have to sin. We're not compelled to do it anymore. We don't have to. We can live a life here and now that is righteous. That means removing the old sinful way of life, yes. And it means living a godly, righteous life from this point on. And I got to tell you, that sounds too good to be true. Anybody with me on that? You know, there are entire denominations, Christian denominations, that are built around the idea that I have to sin every day in thought, word, and deed. Did I sin right now? How about now? Have I sinned yet? Let me ask you this. Do you think you could make it an hour without sinning? You think you can make it a day? And if you can make it a day, why not a week? And if a week, why not a month? And if a month, why can't you do it your entire life, right? With Jesus' power, we can do that. And so when I hear my brothers and sisters saying that they can't, that they're stuck in this pit, that their four-wheeler's still out in the field, I feel badly for them, because all through the Bible I see example after example of people whose lives were changed and they didn't live in sin anymore. For example, Abraham. Y'all remember Abraham? He was the guy that, founded the whole Israelite nation, right? If you look at the beginning of his story, there were a few times where he was messed up a little bit. The whole, I sent my wife or my concubine and her son away. That's not awesome. But the one that got me, he was a liar. Did you know that Abraham was a liar? On 2 occasions, not once, but twice, he told somebody that his wife was his sister so that he didn't get in trouble. And so not once, but twice, some powerful king dude comes and takes his wife away and was going to make her his wife and finds out at the last possible second, wait, no, that's Abraham's wife. And Abraham was a liar. And yet the Israelites consider him the father of their nation. And you know what God declared of him? God said he was righteous. Why? It wasn't because he lied. It's because he believed. Abraham's faith was credited as righteousness. You want another example? How about Moses? Y'all know Moses, right? I mean, he's the hero of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. He wrote Deuteronomy, or at least the vast majority of Deuteronomy. Here we have Moses, the guy, he's probably the most important prophet of the Old Testament. And everybody looks up to Moses and they almost worship the law that he wrote. Moses is this big dude. But do you remember what he did right before he led the Israelites out of Egypt? He killed a guy. Moses lost his temper and killed a guy. He was a murderer. And yet God used him. God brought him back and made him this righteous man. He's the one that gets to write the law. That's pretty awesome, don't you think? And there was David. We already talked about David this morning. He was an adulterer. You remember how that story goes? He looks down off his roof and he sees this attractive woman. He says, hey, she's nice. I want her. Problem was, he was his best friend's wife. A little minor issue. So he has his best friend killed. So he's an adultering, murdering. Oh, and then there was this other time where he decided to take a census, even though it was prohibited by God's law. So he's kind of a sinner too. And yet, we consider him the hero of the Old Testament. So the Old Testament guys didn't measure up very well, right? What about New Testament people? Let's talk about some New Testament people, shall we? How about Peter? Simon Peter. Y'all know Simon Peter? Simon Peter's a pretty cool dude. He gets to be the leader of the church. The Catholics call him the first pope, right? Was he perfect? No, not so much. He had a big mouth. He said a lot of things that maybe he probably shouldn't have. You know, he talked a lot before he spoke, and I can relate to that. But there was one other thing that I really thought was interesting about Simon Peter. The night that Jesus was arrested, Peter denied knowing Jesus. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. 3 times this dude says, I don't know Jesus. And yet he became the leader of the church that revolutionized the world. We talk about Simon in Acts chapter 8. He was a sorcerer until God got a hold of him. We can talk about Paul. Remember Paul's first name? Saul. He was a persecutor. You understand what it meant to persecute Christians in those days? The Bible tells us what it was in Saul's case. It says that Saul was breathing murderous threats against the church. And he was going from town to town, hunting them down, throwing Christians in jail. And you kind of read between the lines, but you can almost see where it says, oh, and if they resisted, he just, accidentally dropped them off a cliff kind of thing, There's this guy. He was a persecutor. He went from town to town hunting Christians, the people of God. And yet when God got a hold of him, when he put his faith in Jesus, his life was radically changed. He became a missionary. And he brought the gospel, starting churches, not just in Israel, but in Asia Minor and into Europe. And in fact, he wrote much of what we call the New Testament, including this book of Romans that we're in today. God can take a liar, a murderer, an adulterer, a denier, a sorcerer, and a persecutor, and he can write them all into the story of his grace. He justified them. Why can't he justify us? He enabled them to live lives that were changed. Why can't he enable us? And for the life of me, I can't come up with a single reason. God can take the worst of us. He can take me. I'm willing to bet he can take you. And if we will put our faith in the blood of Christ, he will justify us, take away our guilt, and make it possible for us to live from this point on as righteous. We can uphold the law. And I don't know about you, but that's good news. I want to tell you the end of the story. It's like Paul Harvey, the rest of the story. So we got the four-wheeler stuck out in the mud, and we knew that we were in trouble, so we decided that we got to abandon the four-wheeler and walk back to the farm. Because at the farm, the farmer has a tractor and a bunch of other stuff, and he can probably get the four-wheeler out. So we jump off the four-wheeler, and the 3 of us start walking across the mud. Now you have to understand, this friend and I, we're both kind of tall, and one of the benefits of being tall is we have big feet. And so our feet, we have an ability we displace more mud, and so we kind of floated across the mud. And we kind of walked out, no big deal, not a problem for us. But the third person, this girl that I really liked, she was kind of small. And she had small feet. And so when she stepped in the mud, she didn't displace it, and she sank to the knees. It was ridiculous. Here she is, down to her knees, and so she's kind of like stuck to her axles in the mud too, right? And if you're stuck to your axles or your knees in the mud, you're stuck. Now, fortunately, she managed to pull her foot out, but it left her shoe behind. So we had to wade down in there and pull the shoe out. And then we kind of had to carry/drag her across the mud because she couldn't do it herself. She's so lazy and incompetent and short and small-footed. I don't know what it is. And we brought her out of the mud, and we go up to the farm, and eventually the farmer brought his tractor down, and he hooked up a chain to the four-wheeler, and he drug it out. So the four-wheeler got rescued. We never did get to finish picking the rock out of that field because it was that soggy, but at least the four-wheeler came back, right? Oh, and by the way, the girl that I really liked is sitting in the sound booth this morning. She's still really short, and her feet are still really small. One of the funniest things about Nicole, if you look at her feet, they're like little baby toes, and it's the funniest thing. She still sinks in mud, by the way. God can rescue us from our sin. He does it through Jesus. He says, yeah, you were messed up, you were guilty, but I'm going to call you innocent. And more than that, I'm going to give you the strength, the power, the ability to move on and live a righteous life from this point on. Is it going to be easy? No. He doesn't promise that. In fact, he does say that in this life you're going to have trouble. Is it going to be perfect? Are we never going to trip up again? I don't think that's the case either. Peter had been following Jesus for 3 years when he denied. But the truth is, we can do it. And when we trip, we just say, God, I messed up again. And he says, okay, let's go. And when we fall down in the mud, we say, God, help us. And he reaches down and he hauls us out. The point is, we can get to that because God made it possible. We can be justified, but more than that, we can uphold the law. And my challenge for you today is to live your life with that hope, with that excitement, with that good news as the centerpiece. You don't have to stay stuck in sin because God enables you to uphold.